Welcome to this Thought Leadership interview with Euractiv. Today we are talking with international lawyer Robert Amsterdam of Amsterdam and Partners, known for high-profile cases from across the world and now increasingly vocal about what he calls a rule of law crisis inside the Spanish tax system. He argues that Spain's tax authority, Hacienda, is not just mishandling enforcement but systematically violating EU law, ignoring rulings of the Court of Justice of the EU and operating without independent judicial oversight, with serious consequences for citizens, businesses, and the credibility of the union's legal order. We will be unpacking in this interview these claims, look at the evidence, and explore the implications for Spain, for the EU, and for the broader debate on the rule of law enforcement across the EU. So, Robert, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
If you could fill us in for those who might not know what's going on, what's happening with the tax system in Spain?
Well, essentially, the tax system is a holdover from the Franco period. The presumption of innocence does not exist. The tax enforcement operates with its own controls that seem to avoid judicial oversight. And at the heart of the tax system is a cancerous bonus that is provided to tax inspectors that simply does not allow for mistake. In other words, the tax inspectors get a bonus on what they take from the people, irrespective of whether they're right or wrong. And once they take that, once they make that decision, their bonus is fixed, they get paid, but the poor taxpayer, if he wants to dispute it, has to put forward all his money, plus pay the penalty, and often wait 8 or 10 years to receive justice. And that appalling circumstance is compounded by something that I could almost call a reign of terror and intimidation, where ordinary taxpayers simply lose all hope, and where the system itself is so predisposed against the taxpayer, because instead of a presumption of innocence, you have what's called a presumption of veracity. In other words, what the tax agency decides is correct unless you can disprove it. It's got nothing to do with rule of law and human rights. It affects everyone in Spain. As a lawyer of 45 years experience working all over the world, I've never seen lawyers and other professionals more in fear of taking on the state. It has gotten to the point where senior lawyers won't even meet me in their offices because they say if the Hacienda finds out that they're collaborating, their clients will be audited and they will be audited. I mean, this is the environment we're talking about in Spain today.
And what's the story behind it? What made you look into this case?
We had a number of clients come to my firm, and we do not practice tax law generally. I mean, I did the UCOS case, but that was a massive tax case, but really it was a human rights case. So I refused the case at first, but then began to understand, and the clients told me this was really a human rights case. It was really about fundamental liberties. And then when we got to Spain to investigate, quite honestly, I couldn't believe what I was finding. And you have to understand, it's all in the context of the corruption of the Sanchez government, which I don't even want to get into now, other than to say many of the indictments relate to people involved in tax. The general prosecutor has been indicted for sharing sensitive tax information of the partner of one of the political opponents of the Socialist Party. And targeted audits seem to be the rule in Spain in terms of politically connected individuals.
I wanted to ask you to elaborate more on what makes this case more than just a technical tax case. So indeed, if you could elaborate further, what makes it in practice a human rights?
Well, simply because individuals are precluded from justice. You can't attack an assessment before it's essentially finalized in court. Then you face this corrupt bonus system. Then you face the pay-to-play scenario. So you really lose, in a way, the right to defense, because you've got to come up with all of this money without proper independent judicial oversight. Because the court in Luxembourg has already found that the first 3 years through the Spanish tax administrative courts, those bodies are not independent. So it's a fundamental issue in terms of the right to defense, the presumption of innocence, the use of all forms of enforcement action against individuals, often before there's been any adjudication. Spain publishes in newspapers a name and shame campaign for people who owe allegedly tax money, sometimes while these amounts are still under appeal. They can raid your bank accounts, again, without judicial enforcement. And it's all encapsulated in a royal order. The Sanchez government is dysfunctional. They haven't had a budget in 3 years, and there's virtually no accountability. And they rule by decree. They use these decrees as a way of bypassing the legislature. Completely undemocratic, completely inconsistent with rule of law, and completely consistent with the Sanchez's government's relationship. They're moving much closer to China than to Europe when it comes to issues of rule of law.
What are some evidence that underpins the fact that, or what you were saying, that confidential tax data has been used towards political opponents or to potentially also intimidate journalists? What's some evidence around it? What are some specific?
Well, the biggest evidence is the actual cases going on today. The Ayuso case, I don't think there's more evidence than you can put forward than the general prosecutor of the country itself being under indictment. But you also have, when it comes to rule of law, the Bolaños case, other cases involving high-level government officials. As you know, the wife of Sanchez, the brother of Sanchez, other members of the government. And then you have an entirely separate set of cases involving the tax administration. These cases, called the Montoro cases, relate to the past head of the Treasury, who basically, and again, he's innocent until proven guilty, but the allegations come after lengthy investigation, and it appears that it was a pay-to-play administration where companies were going in and negotiating payments to avoid tax administration and enforcement. I would say there are very few countries where the issues of corruption and maladministration are so clearly evidenced than in Spain.
In what cases and what, let's say, real life, ordinary citizen examples illustrate the real human, the economic impact of the system that you're describing?
Look, my firm has received 600 complaints from Spanish citizens largely. I'm talking broken homes, divorces, deaths, heart attacks, from people who simply are without hope. Policemen who, when they've retired, had their cars seized by tax enforcement. Hacienda does not operate within rules. And when they do these really terrible practices, which include, by the way, sending out mass correspondence threatening people. In one case, I think they achieved over $1 billion of recovery simply by sending out mass threats. They operate by threats and fear. Tax collections are rising way beyond any form of economic justification. In fact, you could argue Spain is killing its business community. And you evidence that by the fact that so many influencers and young people move out of the country. We had an R&D group that were forced into bankruptcy. They got the incentives from one side of the government and were closed down by the tax administration because the wrong signatures were attached. And when asked why this cruelty would go on, again, it was clear it was the bonuses. They could destroy a business and make their personal commission, if you will, on the tax recovered. And they didn't care about Spain or the future of those businesses or the future of the business class, which reminded me what I learned as a young lawyer when I was doing a major Russian case, when I was told, when you're in a corrupt society, don't think about tomorrow. All people are thinking about is today. And that's the story of the hacienda. They are ruthless and they do not give a damn about the people that they are acting against as long as they can achieve their bonus numbers. And in reality, it's not these individuals' faults. It's the fault of a government that incentivizes maladministration. And that's why I'm saying this is an EU problem, because the EU guarantees, under its treaties, rule of law. It guarantees certain inalienable rights. And the Spanish people don't have those rights. Their judiciary, their independence is being eaten away by the present government that's politicizing the judiciary. We are seeing a turn against European standards. In fact, there was recently an enlargement report which was used to condemn Georgia. Absolutely true. But if you use the same criteria the enlargement folks used against Georgia and you applied it to Spain, I don't know that Spain would have passed the test. And this is the point. The point is, once you're in the EU, it is not a free pass to break down rule of law.
That brings me to my next questions. Would you think that Spain is an outlier from this point of view? Does this reflect a broader trend of tax authorities potentially overstepping their own mandates across the EU?
No, Spain is clearly an outlier. It's also an outlier with respect to the sharing of tax information. Spain attempts to gather massive amounts of tax information from other countries to try to justify their use of shooting first and asking questions later. The Spanish tax authority very often alleges, especially with respect to people under the Beckham Act, which is basically an incentive scheme to lure foreigners in. Spain basically engages in a practice of targeting these individuals years after they received a certificate of compliance, and then going after them for hundreds of pages of documentation. And if they don't respond correctly, assessing them wildly. If they do respond correctly, charging them with simulación, which is essentially fraud. Either way, the tax collector gets his bonus and the foreigner is left with 10 years of wild litigation and expense after the ill-gotten tax and penalties are paid.
You're in Brussels at the moment, and you've been arguing that Brussels has been rather passive in this case. What concrete actions do you think the Commission or the European Parliament should be taking? Should they be addressing this case in the following weeks and months?
Well, Brussels should be praised because it is sending a group of experts to Spain in January addressing the rule of law problem. And what we're here to do is to sharpen the focus on the hacienda. Because, as I said, I think that how a country deals with tax is fundamental to the relationship between the citizen and the state. And there was a very important group of Spaniards years ago who came up with a doctrine that basically said, as long as the hacienda is functioning in the way it is, Spain doesn't have citizens, it has subjects. And what we're looking to do is give Spanish citizens back their citizenship.
By a group of experts, you mean a delegation of members of the European Parliament?
Yes.
In a delegation? Mm-hmm.
Yes, I do.
Mm-hmm. What concrete actions do you think the EU could be taken if this is really a case of human rights violations, as you argue?
Listen, there are many sanctions the EU can engage in, but the most important thing is when it comes to rule of law, a level of accountability. The Sanchez government needs to be held accountable for what it's doing. We have the Zapatero scandal that's going on, I don't want to get into at this point, but there is an obvious two-class system in terms of those who politically are exempt and those, the nobodies who are consistently attacked. So I think it's very important as a signaling about the crisis in Spain's rule of law. And as I said, we're hoping there will be more focus on the hacienda and the loss of the presumption of innocence and how that can be legislatively regained.
One of the tools that you said could potentially be invoked to address that is Article 7, is let's say, the nuclear option. Do you think that Spain would be at the level of Poland and Hungary?
I think that Spain's already there. And I think the question is, because of Spain's unique role in the EU, whether there will be the courage to take that step.
Mm-hmm. What other tangible steps do you think could be taken?
Well, again, it's very hard for me to want to instruct these representatives before they get to Spain, and I don't want to be presumptuous, but I think heightened attention on, for instance, judicial appointments, and the fact that judicial appointments have recently become so politicized, as well as the issue of these incentivized bonuses. And the fact is, the bonuses that we're seeing in the tax administration have not just been unique to the tax administration. There have been other bonuses, perhaps less invasive, but still going on. Spain needs a wake-up call, generally, and perhaps with the assistance of the European Parliament, these visits might prompt a rethink. And of course, Spain is also facing, hopefully soon, elections, and something has to be done in Spain to deal with the breakdown of the democratic system, the fact that the parliament's not functional. But again, those aren't our issues.
Mm-hmm. So, and what does the public opinion say about this, since you've been bringing up and
I think it's overwhelmingly favorable in terms of seeking change. I mean, 600 separate requests we've received. And as we've told the Spanish government many times, we are not there to retain new clients. We don't practice Spanish law, let alone Spanish tax law. But what we're there to do is refer people on to experts in the area and use their cases as basically feeding into media awareness of all of the catalog of abuses that have been going on with the hacienda.
Mm-hmm. Did I understand correctly that you've also brought the case to the OECD, to the UN?
We have filed a 50-page paper with the OECD, mm-hmm. arguing that Spain is systemically violating issues relating to the transmission of tax data, and that Spain should be suspended from this transmission of tax mm-hmm. data because of breaches of rule of law. And then recently we held a press conference in New York because we denounced to the US Treasury the fact that Spain was storing tax information on Huawei computers, which violates a general understanding among many developed countries that those computers are insecure in terms of their possible infiltration by the Chinese. So, from an American and an EU perspective, it's incredibly dangerous that Spain is pursuing this. Mm-hmm. And Spain is, in fact, a leader in the use of Huawei technology. And while I was giving the press conference in Spain, Huawei was holding its international conference on connectedness in Madrid.
Mm-hmm. So it's even going as far as also being a security issue.
Oh, it's absolutely a security issue. And it's like everything else when it comes to Hacienda. This kind of information only leaks out. Hacienda is wildly deceptive. When we first wrote to them about these issues, they consistently lied to us about the nature of the bonus. They've hidden this Huawei system. They dissemble. They don't provide answers because they can't be transparent, because they know these bonuses are inherently corrupt, inherently wrong, and have no place in a free and democratic society.
But let's, to wrap up, let's come back to one of the points that you were making at the beginning in terms of about Spain's tax appeals court lacking independent. What would a properly independent model look like in practice?
Well, I mean, I'm referring to the Santander case. And once again, I think the independent model would be one where there was not the relationship that presently exists between the administrative courts and the Hacienda administration. But again, I don't want to be presumptuous and start coming out with government models. But, you know, Spain's situation is one that needs justice now. These people, these hundreds of people that have contacted us, and the millions of Spaniards who today live in fear of Hacienda, this all needs to be addressed, and quickly. And we hope that, you know, our activities, as well as a whole bunch of new groups that have sprung up in Spain, will lead to those critical changes.
So to summarize, what are the top 3 reforms that you would expect Spain to undertake were it to address this issue?
Well, look, firstly, we have to rid ourselves of the bonus, the tax bonus. Secondly, we have to change the entire misuse of the tax courts, and in fact, in my view, probably abolish them. And lastly, we must change the pay-to-play rule. It can't be fair that you have to pay the tax plus the massive penalty before you can properly appeal. That isn't right, and that must change. And that, as well as the bonus, as well as the lack of independence of the courts, this is a very toxic cocktail for Spanish citizens to swallow.
I think on this note, we can wrap up the interview. Thank you very much to Robert Amsterdam for having joined us today and for having shed a light on the situation of the tax authorities in Spain. Thank you very much for being with us here at Euractiv, and thank you very much to everyone for tuning in to this thought leadership interview. See you at the next one here in Euractiv.